kind of an idea of who we're working with each and every day. People ask, did you plan on, sticking around this long in Mercer Island, or what keeps you here? And it's the people, and that's really where it starts and stops for me. It's the relationships that we build and the opportunity to work with incredible students, incredible staff, and then the most supportive parent community that any educator could ask for. So with that, we do have that small district feel. We are sandwiched between two of the biggest districts in the state, with Seattle and Bellevue, of course, and then we've got Lake Washington and Issaquah and some of the others right up the road as well. But being a small district, we really have the opportunity to get to know our families, get to know our students, and keep that close-knit community. But there are big district expectations. We know that you have friends and family who have kids in these other districts, and economies of scale comes into play. There are things that those other districts can do a lot easier than we can, simply because of their size. But we really try to work hard to make sure that that isn't something that is a barrier for us to continuously improve, because we have incredible potential as a school district. I think we've achieved some incredible things, certainly during my 13 years here, and prior to that, we've had some great leaders, some great educators, and great community members, but I really see the future as being even brighter, frankly, than where it's been. I think we have a lot of opportunity to continue to strive forward. So when I go home at night, a little bit about me. That's my wife, Dana. We met at the University of Puget Sound down in Tacoma as undergrad. She was from California and I was from Colorado. So we started off down in Southern California, which is where I started teaching. We moved to Colorado after we got married and tried to live there for 8 years, and it just never felt like home. We kept vacationing up here and decided that why not raise our family here. So I have 3 kids. Callan is my oldest. He's a senior at Issaquah High School. Mara is my middle. She's a sophomore at Issaquah High School. And then Davin, there in the middle, he's a 6th grader, and he's at Hamlin Robinson right now, across the bridge. So those are the 3 that I go home to at night, and that job oftentimes is way harder than this one, as many of you know with that. As a school district, we went through kind of a new vision, mission, value process about 4 years ago with the school board and then Superintendent Donna Koloski, community input and others, and really tried to re-anchor ourselves in 4 core values. The first one being about the whole child. How do we support students, not just academically, not just socially and emotionally, physically, but the whole child all the way around. Just today, I was meeting with the chief of police and one of our directors down at Mercer Island Youth and Family Services, having this exact conversation, remembering that our students have a whole life. We have a part of it during the school day, but there's also a community around them. And how do we enrich the community? How do we enrich our schools to make sure we're taking care of our students and their whole selves as we go through? Our second value is thinking about inclusive and equitable learning settings. How do we make sure that our students come each and every day and feeling that they have an opportunity and that it is somewhere where they can access their learning and meet their full potential? The third one there, thinking about safe and supportive school environments. I have a different portion of a presentation about school safety, but it's something that we took very seriously during COVID, but it was all about health. And there were certainly things around the safety of our schools that we didn't rehearse or put as much emphasis into. And so that's a major priority in the first third of the year, is really thinking about the safety of our schools, which is why I work closely with the chief of police as well as our school resource officer and others, thinking about our buses from the moment a student steps on that bus in the morning till they get off the bus in the afternoon, or a parent picks them up and drops them off. How do we make sure our schools are safe and supportive? And then finally, of course, in an education environment, how do we make sure that it's rigorous and challenging? How do we continue to push that envelope? And we have a really delicate balance right now. I was meeting with the new superintendent of Issaquah on Friday for the first time. Luckily, it was a professional meeting, not a parent meeting with the new superintendent. But we were talking, and she said, what are you thinking about? Like, what are you challenged by right now? And I said, The biggest challenge for me right now is how do I take high achieving aspirations of students and balance that with the pressure and the mental health and the stress and the anxiety. And both of those are sometimes seen as it's an either or, and how do I make it a both and how do I work with the community to really get the priorities around what is the goal that we want for the students, and then how do we work backward from that. And that really is the biggest challenge right now. We know our students are telling us that they are stressed out, that they're anxious, that they are worried, that they feel the pressure, and sometimes it comes from themselves, or it comes from their classmates. It's not even necessarily from you as parents or from counselors, but they feel like they have to go to whatever school, and we're really trying to work on that. But we also need to push our programming to make sure that we are offering the very best for our students. So those are some things there. So this is a risk, but I have to show it. I showed it to all of our staff on part of our opening keynote, and that is thinking about the expectations we have for students and knowing that the expectations we have for them when they walk in the door, they pick up on right away. And the teacher is critical in that, but so are our bus drivers and our paraeducators and our nurses, you as parents, of making sure that we aren't having expectations that aren't matching the true potential of our students. So that kid there at Clear Creek High School in probably about the junior year certainly wasn't expected to go on and do things like this. But that is me today. And so I didn't have everyone who believed in me in that time, but I did have some key people. I had key educators who were in my life who made sure that I believed in myself. And they believed in me even when I didn't. And we have to continue to make sure that is alive and well for every single kid in this district, so that even if you look like that, and who knows what was going on, you can still come out and you can be all right. So those are some things that I try to keep in mind. Our board also has 5 fundamentals, which we really use a little bit like our strategic plan. And so we're thinking about the personalized learning environment for all of our students, where we're trying to differentiate and create learning environments so that our students can succeed. Maintaining those high levels of academic rigor in all content areas, not just in one or the other. Thinking about our third one, which is getting into that social emotional learning, citizenship. How do we make sure that our students are good people? And that they require those skills so that life beyond high school can continue to have an impact. Then certainly engaging in analytical and critical thinking, and then lastly, similar to our value, that we are embracing our students and who they are as people in terms of their equity, in terms of their equitable experience, inclusivity, and diversity. As part of my entry plan, coming in as a superintendent, it's certainly always interesting when you are someone who's inside of the system already, and you have to think about the other 2 superintendents I've worked for or worked with. Dr. Gary Plano was here, and he's who hired me back in 2009, and then we had Donna Koloski up until last year. And so there are things that they've done that really helped our district grow, but how do I now define myself as a superintendent, and what do I value and want to accomplish? So one of the things I put together for the school board was a communication plan. Had a lot of great help from Ian Henry, who you've probably received communication from as well, and others, but really trying to think about, and I won't go through the whole thing, it's online if you want to look at it, but I think there have been some gaps in communication, particularly being proactive and also being really honest, transparent, and getting information in a timely fashion. And so I really tried to think about internally in our organization, how do we get messaging out? Something that Matt was doing today is he met with 2 of our principals just to talk about his role and how we can support them. And so thinking about how do we think about ourselves in service of others, and especially our schools out of the central office, but making sure that our communications are clear within our district, but then how do we more importantly get it out to you? Thinking about social media platforms and other tools that we can use to engage you and really try to seek feedback as well. So a lot of the communication so far has been one way. We've been just trying to get the year off to a great start. So we've been bombarding you with communication. Now we'll start transitioning as we get into the fall, thinking about some of the feedback. So for instance, today I just sent a survey. Twice a year we survey all of our families who have exited the district. Not the graduates, but the people who have chosen to leave but could still be here. And we reach out to them and ask them for feedback. How did we do? What's worked well for you? What didn't work well? And some families left for private school, but others just left because they moved away, but we can still learn from them. So continuing to think about how we engage our families. And then always thinking about how do we be more consistent? How do you know that our communication, you can depend on it so it's reliable, it's consistent, and it has a common message and you're not getting mixed messages, which I think has been a challenge. The heart and soul, of course, are our students, and it's always important to remember that even though K-12 is our core, we actually serve students from birth all the way through 21. Through Child Find, which is an important process if we have students that we know about in the community who were born and they have developmental delays or speech delays, occupational, physical therapy. From birth to 3 years old, we try to help connect those families to resources such as Kindering or others in and around the Puget Sound region. Once they do turn 3, unlike kindergarten, you don't wait until the new school year. As soon as a student turns 3, they're eligible for services through our preschool. And so we start serving students at Northwood in our preschool program at age 3. Then obviously we have our K-12, and then we have what we call our pathway program. So we have some students who at the end of high school and the end of their 12th grade year, they still need transition services to build life skills and to transition into the community. And so we have a program called Pathways, which is also out of Northwood, where we connect people or students right into the community to start learning some of those job and life skills. We have a number of services. They're not completely complete there. We oftentimes think about special education and others, but of course we have EL services, we have LAP services, Title I services, alternative learning, and all the way through. So if you ever have questions about those, our principals are there to answer questions with the central office are there to answer those questions as well. Our community certainly has been changing in terms of the demographic. We oftentimes hear from our community, or we hear from particularly community members off of Mercer Island, that there's no diversity on Mercer Island, that it's all white students on Mercer Island. And that absolutely isn't the case. We have been trending in this direction where, yes, we once were majority white clearly, but that's been trending down over the last several years. Our kindergartners and our first graders over the past 10 years have looked very different than our juniors and seniors. And so we have definitely a changing demographic. Asian and 2 or more races are our 2 race and ethnicity categories that are growing the fastest right now. This is important because it certainly helps us with programming and thinking about the services we're offering. It also is important when we're out there recruiting teachers and we're recruiting educators to make sure that they know that our community isn't what they might expect it to be. And so we're monitoring that. Another thing that we're monitoring closely is our enrollment. Enrollment is the biggest driver for revenue for our school district, and so we were predicted to be declining slightly over the next several years into the 25-26 school year. But then what we had was this effect here with COVID, where we had that slip fall almost like an earthquake, where it was rapidly accelerated and we lost a number of students. Some went elsewhere and moved away or went, but the large majority of those went to private school. So one of our key challenges right now is how do we recruit not just great teachers and educators, how do we recruit our families who still live on Mercer Island to want to come back to Mercer Island School District. We thought we were going to be even lower than we are this year. We left at the end of last year at 3,951 full-time equivalent students, and as of this morning we were at 3,944. At one point we thought we'd be in the 3,800, so that was a good sign, and we had a much better enrollment than we thought.
Can you explain the FTE? I think that was helpful.
Yep. So this graph here is talking about FTE, And then this graph is talking about head count. Matt, you want to talk about that? That's actually right in your wheelhouse.
Sure. Everything is generated, as Superintendent Rundle said, by enrollment, and specifically by FTE, that's full-time equivalent. So you could have a high school student that takes part-time classes, but they equate everything to one FTE, and that's how we are funded as a school district. And then as the next slide will show, head count is how many students, physical bodies we have in the classrooms.
So we have about 4,019 students registered in the school district, but they only comprise, as Matt was just saying, or Director Sullivan was just saying, 3,944 FTEs. Some students go to private school for 2 periods a day from the high school, so we don't get full funding from the state on that. Or some students that go to Running Start, a lot of the Running Start then money, and there's a little bit of a different calculator there, but we have a lot more students than we do FTE, which is another point of emphasis for us to really think about why are students choosing other options and what could we do differently to keep that FTE in the district, because every student is worth roughly
$10,000.
Okay, so every full-time student is $10,000.
Do they, is it if they just take one class somewhere else, or are they still considered?
Part-time.
That
Yeah.
would be severe.
Okay.
Yeah, so if they go to Privet for 1 period a day and then come back, we'll lose out on that portion of the FTE. Now, we run a 7-period day at the high school. 6 period is what the state funds at full-time. We don't get extra credit for kids who take 7, that's what the levy's for. But if a student takes 5, they're not considered a full-time student. So it impacts mainly our high school more than our middle school and our elementary.
And it looks like you're forecasting a continued decline over
Yeah.
the next few years.
We are, but I think it's going to flatten out. Our former executive director of finance, these were some of his projections. We were actually supposed to probably be just right around maybe 3,923 at one point. Then he had even forecasted 3,800 and something. So Director Sullivan's, one of his main things that he'll be doing in the coming months is really to sharpen that and get a good indicator there.
I guess you'll talk later on about the causes for that decline.
Yes, birth rate is a major cause of that decline, and projections on King County birth rates at that period of time, housing costs, so there's a bunch of metrics that go into it. You want to just talk a little bit about
I think you touched upon it. It is, what at least I saw on Vashon Island was the gentrification of Vashon Island. And housing prices went up. Young families can't afford to live there, to raise their kids there. And so we saw on Vashon Island at least that decline in enrollment. And it was mainly, like I said, gentrification of the island.
Yeah. Our biggest surprise this year, in a great way, what's really buoying this up is a larger kindergarten class than we thought. I've been meeting with MIPA, which is the Mercer Island Preschool Association, their 2 leads, and I'm going to be doing some work with MIPA and the parents, but they're bursting at the seams in the preschools, which is a great sign for us. So what do we have to do? We need to get into the preschools with our teachers and educators to talk about our school district and really market ourselves. There's more competition for education than ever before. I told you that I have a student at Hamlin Robinson right now. So I'm one of those that I have a student in a private school. And so I understand that. We don't have the charter school competition nearly as much as other states. But we certainly have private schools, we have online schools, which are growing by leaps and bounds, and then homeschool is growing quite a bit in our state and even in our community, more so than it's been before. So,
Yeah, you mentioned that you talk to parents who leave the district, I guess. Like, do we know what caused that big drop off to, like, why did they go to private school? Is it just because they were in-person learning or
Yeah. We didn't transition nearly quick enough. And that is evident all the way through that I think people were willing to give us that grace in the spring of that first year. But when we weren't going to be coming back in the fall, that's where we saw a lot of student or families making other choices because the private schools were making that rapid transition and we were not. So that was the biggest driver. Yep.
Thanks.
Some families have come back at transition, 5th grade to 6th grade, 8th grade to 9th grade. And others who thought they would go for just a year decided, "No, actually, we'll keep our kids there until the transition because if they've already started in one school, then they went to a new school, then to come back again, that'd be 3 transitions in a matter of just a few years. And in elementary school, that can be hard on students. So. thinking about our equitable and inclusive learning, we're talking a lot about 4Bs. I got this from Dr. Tammy Campbell, who was the former superintendent for the Federal Way School District. And now she's out doing some consulting, but I got the chance to work with her this summer a little bit, and she really talked about these 4Bs, and I think they fit well into our vision and our mission and our values, and we're talking about this in all of our schools right now. But when we start thinking about the first B is making sure that every student belongs. Those Fred Rundles who look like that in high school, they need to belong too, and have a place. And we also need to make sure our staff feels like they belong. Attracting and retaining staff is incredibly difficult right now in education, as I'm sure you've read about. It's a nationwide issue. I think there's lots of reasons people come to Mercer Island to work. Pay is not always the be-all, end-all. It's having a good friend at work. It's feeling like your principal cares about you. It's getting professional development. It's feeling like you can make a difference in the lives of students each and every day, and that you're connected in the community. But our students, ultimately, they've got to belong. They have to feel like this is the place for them. And then we have to make sure that we have absolute belief in unhinged potential of all of our students. Do we believe in them at our core? Are they truly the priority, or do we just say that? And really thinking about how do we make sure our students know that we believe in them and that they can believe in themselves. That self-efficacy is a major driver of success for students, particularly when you start talking about on-time graduation, passing all your classes in 9th grade, making that transition. These are all big markers for students. We've been talking for 3 years about removing barriers. What have we put up that's getting in the way of our students and being able to access their education? Sometimes we've done it intentionally, and it's had unintended outcomes or negative outcomes for our students. Other times it's been completely unintentional. We put in a system or we changed some things, and all of a sudden it created barriers. So what barriers are there that we can remove for our students and for our staff so they can better meet the needs of our students as they go through? And then finally, Dr. Campbell talks about broadcasting student voice. Our last superintendent, this is certainly a legacy of hers. She brought this more than we had ever in this school district, where the schools aren't built for adults. They're not built for teachers. They're not built for principals and superintendents. They're not built for parents. They're built for kids. And they're community places. So how do we make sure our students have a voice and a seat at the table right with us making decisions about their future? And then we've been talking a lot about equity in our school district, but Pedro Negura, who is now he's full-time out on the speaking tour. I think he's done with UCLA and some of his tenured positions, but he really did some keynote work about 5, 6, 7 years ago around, equity is really just excellence. It's creating excellent schools for everyone. And you do that certainly by creating equitable learning environments, but every student has to have access to the very best education possible. We have some tremendous paraeducators, we have some tremendous teachers and support staff, but getting the training for them so that they can open those doors for students. The next one is making sure that, by making sure that we have equitable options for our students that aren't advantaging some students over others. That's a key piece of kids feeling like they belong, removing those barriers, and then making sure that as we're on this equitable learning journey, that it's not about blame, shame, it's not about guilt, it's not about we were doing it wrong. We can just do better, and really trying to move forward in our thinking to get out of the fray of making political statements and getting into that and just saying it's just about doing the right thing for students, making sure that they are good people too. So just quickly, this is, I think I showed this to our staff too on the first day back with them, but just a reminder about how simple it can be sometimes and how great our students can achieve.
My shoelace.
You can do it.
Please.
Okay. 2 bunny ears. Loop around and pull together. Got it? don't want to be here. James, I want you to pick an artwork you like and tell me about it. Art is a wonderful thing and I want to enjoy it with you, okay? What do you say? Okay.
Before you towers a terrifying scene of war. Thousands of officers break the grassy ground in a cavalry charge. Soldiers sport in blood-red uniforms, marble valor in a fearless resolve to attack. Some blow military bugles, others raise their voice in a war cry. Mighty silver blades exalted above their heads. Leading up front, a commander on a mighty white stallion. The beast's eyes were wide and ferocious, every muscle and vein pulsing through his skin. The commander rides the steed high, his face blazing with heroism, but still in his eyes a glimmer of fear. For at the front line, survival is not guaranteed. I'm so proud of you.
Can you describe that one to us over there?
So we oftentimes talk about inclusion and how do we include all of our learners in the learning environment, and that's about broadcasting. That's about making sure that our students are following the lead of them and making sure that we see that inclusion can be done by our students. It's not an adult-centered thing, but it's also our students. A huge thanks, and this is what I said at the beginning of what keeps me here. Last February, we passed 2 levies that I'll talk about a little bit more with over 70% approval rates, which were the highest in the state for a community that were out there. And so those levies, which help support our schools and our school district, are essential. We have 3 of them. The first one is our enrichment programs and operations levy. The second one is our capital project and technology levy. And as you were coming in today, you might have seen all of the different projects we were working on. This space has been completely remodeled over the summer, and that's all paid for by capital technology levy dollars. And the last one is transportation. We did not run a transportation levy when we could have last year. We're making some decisions right now about what we want to do for the future with electric buses. We have 2 electric buses on their way. They'll be delivered
Soon.
So we'll add 2 electric buses to our fleet and really start thinking about what's the road ahead for that. So we've got some thinking to do before we wanted to take a transportation levy out to the community. The school board wants to think more about that. We need to study that more and make sure that the 2 that arrive are actually a great investment.
Will they be on a set route, or are they going to rotate into different?
Does Patrick know yet? I don't know if he
No
knows
decision
that
on
yet.
that. That's a great question. We've not decided that yet.
We'll probably rotate it around. They take a little different training just because of the way the mechanics work and everything. So we do have to do some new training with our drivers on them. And then certainly just the mechanics of it all and keeping them running. There aren't that many electric bus mechanics in the state right now. So that's another barrier right now. But I'll come back to levies in a second. Our PTAs are incredible supporters at the school levels. We have our executive council with our PTA, and we have incredible organization and supports. And I know many of you are members of the PTA. But tonight's event is testament to our school's foundation as well. I had no idea that a school's foundation could do so much, especially in a community like this, until I arrived. I came from a district with 60,000 students, and we had goals around $25,000 a year for the school's foundation. And it's just because it wasn't part of what they were trying to accomplish. I don't think they'd really realized in that district the full potential of what you can do with foundation dollars. It's definitely a fundraising arm, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that. It is definitely a great advocacy group and whatnot, but most importantly is it continues to reveal just how committed this community is to public education. So looking at our financial status here, and Matt, jump in wherever I start tripping up and start messing it up, but I mentioned that one of our levies is our enrichment programs and operations levy. This is the levy that we collect that comes in that really supports all of our programs. It supports extra staffing, and it's the one that we can kind of do the most with because it goes into our general fund. So it allows the most flexibility as we go through. At the very bottom, I have a footnote, which is really important. Those of you new to the area, we had a decision that actually went all the way to the Supreme Court, and it was a case that was filed against the state of Washington and the legislature, and it was called the McCleary decision. And after the McCleary decision, it completely changed the way schools are funded in the state of Washington. In 2017, our last year, kind of the McCleary dollars before it ended, we were collecting almost $17 million. It was based on your property values, and that was what we were receiving to support our programs and operations. If we fast forward as we project out to 2024, you can see we'll be just over $11 million in projected revenue from our EP&O levy. So that decrease there is because the state stepped in and reduced the amount that we can collect, and we collect based on a per pupil amount. So we are considered a property-rich district because of the value of the homes on Mercer Island, and so there are a few districts in the state where we now collect based on our student enrollment and not on your value of your homes. That, of course, is a problem when you're declining in enrollment because you're now getting less. And then cities like Seattle, who got to collect $3,000 a student, we get $2,500 a student. So there's inequities in the system that we're going to be working with the legislature on this year. We're already gearing up to start talking to our legislators and others to try to fix some of the inequities. But when people say Mercer Island, it's a wealthy community, it must be a wealthy district, it's really not the case.
And this is where the FTEs come in.
Correct. So we fund a number of FTEs out of this as well.
And by FTEs, we fund a number of staff FTEs,
Yep.
not students.
Correct. So we have staff FTE and we have student FTE. And so this chart here, just roughly 2/3 of all of our staff in our district are paid for by the state. So the state has a formula that they say, for this many students, you get this many principals, you get this many nurses, you get this many psychologists, you get this many, so on and so forth. So about 2/3 of our staff are funded by the state. The other third is all funded by you through the levies. And that's why those levies are so important with passing them. But when you've gone from collecting 17 million, and then you take into account inflation and everything else, and now we're going to be down under 12 million, the impact to us is catastrophic in some ways. Now, that's where we have to get creative. We have to think about our funding in different ways, and it's not all doom and gloom. There are things that we can do, but when we start talking about raises and the state starts saying we're going to give a 5.5% raise to our school districts, the problem with that is they only fund it for the positions that they think should be in the schools. So the 5.5% money from the state only funds 2/3 of our employees. The other third, we now have to go into the levy for to try to make up for that extra amount. So what that means is a 5.5% IPD, that's 1.5 million from the state, that's actually only 3.2% of a raise. And then you look over here, what would it take to be a 5.5% raise? It would be almost 2.7 million or $2.6 million. So those are the challenges that we have. I am incredibly grateful to our Mercer Island Education Association. Many of you know we had an open contract that expired on August 31st. Whereas other communities had labor action in Seattle and Kent and others, our association continued to come to work and continued to work with Aaron and our bargaining team, with their bargaining team, and we did not have a work stoppage. I think our educators and others see the value in continuing to work together and not have that stoppage. So we're almost done with the contracts. They're not quite signed. We have a few more hurdles to go through. They have to go through a ratification vote. Our school board needs to vote on it, but hopefully by the end of next week, our contracts will be complete. But this is a major sticking point for districts all over the state, trying to figure out how do we fund these when we're all so reliant on our levies. Questions on that?
Yes, I mean, is there anything in motion to maybe remove that cap on levies or change it? It seems like, I don't know, it just seems like an unintended consequence that the state increased the funding and then we end up with less funding. It's ridiculous.
Absolutely. Matt, you've been on a lot of calls recently. I know that.
There's always the discussion of removal of the levy cap, is what they call that, because as you astutely noted, it's very unequal. And it's really penalizing a lot of districts. They call it the either or is what they'd like to see, where instead of we getting penalized on Mercer Island because we are a property-rich district, hence we have the lesser of the option, the levy cap, it's $2,500 versus the property value, and that's why we saw the loss of that millions of dollars. So there is always that language in the legislative session of the either or and the levy cap, and that's what we continually discuss and hope and wish and pray for.
Just quickly on here, looking at our staffing over time, we certainly have to really be thinking about matching our enrollment with our staffing. And during McCleary, we did receive a little bit of money, not a lot, from the ESSER funds, which was the state stimulus dollars to help during COVID. But we certainly maintained staffing levels pretty consistent across the three different levels of schools, and it was really to help support students. And we know we spent down our reserves, we spent down our fund balance to make that happen, but now we're gonna have to course correct outside of any legislative action there. The goal then is certainly to try to keep the impact as far away from the classroom as possible, and we'll be working hard to take a look at some of those. So I think the most important thing for tonight then is, why is the Schools Foundation so critical? First and foremost, unlike tax dollars and others that go all over the state, every single dollar that's raised by the Schools Foundation goes right into the school district. It gives us tremendous flexibility when we're able to drive it to the need, or we can pivot and we don't have to fill out a new grant and go back to the state like our Title I funding and Title II funding. We can go right in, talk to Tammy, talk to the board, here's where we have the need, and we can press forward. It is a tremendous asset to have as a school district. And in a district with about a $68 million budget, that roughly $1 million or so that the foundation raises actually makes a big difference as we're looking at it. It's also interesting to see, how do we make the dollars go as far as we can? We braid the funding the best we can. A district like Mercer Island, Title I, which is collected to help students based on free and reduced lunch counts, we don't have a lot of students who are receiving free and reduced lunch, so we receive less than $100,000 from the state and federal government for Title I. So how do we support some of the other programming to make sure all schools have interventions? That's where the foundation comes in. Title II funding, which is our professional development for our school district. It's less than $55,000 to do professional development for our entire school district, and we share some of that with our private schools. So private schools who want to participate in some of these, we act as kind of a pass-through, and then there's a per pupil cost that we distribute out to our local friends in our private schools. Title III is our EL professional development and support. So we are just under $35,000 now for that support there. And then lastly, Title IV. What's that?
What's EL?
English learners, English language learners. Yep. And then Title IV, which was a new one, this is more for supporting and closing achievement gaps. We received $10,000. So our external support from our state and federal government are very limited. So again, we hear you're a property-rich district, you must be a rich district, you must have a lot of money. It really actually is the inverse on this. And I'm not saying that districts like Tukwila and some of our other neighboring districts that have students coming from very different circumstances don't need the money in their schools. They absolutely do. But there's a real impact on Mercer Island too for school districts like us who we have kids we have to educate too, and they deserve great teachers. They deserve great principals. They deserve great para-educators, and we've got to make sure that happens. And it's becoming more and more challenging. And the last thing I'll say in terms of why it's so important with the foundation is it frees dollars up to do something else. When we're not paying for textbook adoptions out of the general fund, and because our foundation is picking that up, we can take that money and go get that extra paraprofessional. Or we can go and we can pay for that additional intervention for students. And so a lot of times we talk about, well, what does the foundation do? I want to know, where does that dollar go? Well, it just went to something so we could do something else for your kid. And so it's not always a direct impact, but there are so many indirect ways that the school's foundation does that. So a couple things that we've done recently, our entire kindergarten through 5th grade literacy adoption and numeracy adoption this year, almost entirely paid for out of the foundation as well as the levy with the technology levy. And so I had, in my own district in Issaquah, there were notices going out that they were putting a halt to all adoptions last spring because they were gearing up for cuts. We didn't have to because of our foundation. We're going to be looking to get the other half done next year. We've had our letters training, which is language essentials for teachers of reading and spelling. This has been in the Seattle Times. It was on the front cover of the Seattle Times last spring around the work that we're doing. And this stemmed out of a review about 10 years ago where we were looking at our different learners review and realizing that students with dyslexia and other reading disabilities, we really weren't meeting their needs. And this was a big part of that. So we've got our kindergartners, our first grader teachers, our second grade, our third grade, and 5th grade completely trained. Now we hopefully will have our 4th graders with our 4th grade teachers as well. And then you can see we support fine arts with the school's foundation in some of those innovation grants, expanding options for literacy in the high school and the middle school. The last math adoption 3 years ago in the middle school was all at the foundation. So you can kind of see the impact adds up pretty quickly for us. So lastly, just kind of thinking, closing out, we've talked to this year around not just the 4 Bs, but also amplifying what we're doing well. It's so easy for us to sit back and say, we need to do this better, we have to do that. We're doing some amazing things in this school district, and we have so much potential to do even more, and that's where we have to elevate our game, continue to push forward and get even better to meet the needs of our students, and ultimately to help them thrive, to help our organization thrive, and certainly help our community thrive. So finally, it's today, it's tomorrow, and it's together. That's where it takes all of us working together, not just financially, but also the support you provide as volunteers, as positive messengers in the community. And I am grateful to be your superintendent. It is an honor to get to work with amazing people and get to work on behalf and in service of all of you. So thanks for being here tonight. We'll answer any questions that you would like in our remaining time. I don't know how much more time we have.
It's as long as you want to stay.
You got it. So, questions?
I had a question about either number or percentage of other districts that are in our same situation.
I don't know all of them. Bainbridge, Mercer Island,
Vashon Island.
Vashon Island. I think Issaquah just crested over into it. So I think there's 12 class there. Camas might be one down in the south part of the state. So I think there are 12 districts in the state who are on that per pupil based on the levy.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then after the levies, is your overall operating budget after, roughly the same as the 17 million, or is it dropped by that much? Is that a delta you've had to fill, or are you not able to fill that and the overall budget has dropped?
Do you want, I can answer from historical, but you might have the most recent in terms of that.
Best answer in this case.
So historically, because we have less students, we do have less expenditures on that. We don't need as many second grade classrooms. And a teacher with benefits and everything is roughly $126,000 with all total on average. And so, there's some cost savings there. The rest of it has all been made up by either choosing to do something else or trying to apply for more grants. This year we applied for another COVID relief grant to get another health room assistant into our health rooms. We applied through the county for an ESPER grant to get another counselor. So some of it's piecing it together, going to the foundation, our PTAs, so getting creative that way. And then there are some that have not been impacted and have actually been growing. Career and technical education, or what we call CCR, those buckets of money, the federal government has just jammed money into that. And so that one in the state, that continues to be a place where we can offset costs by driving them there. So it's been trying to get creative.
A couple of questions. The first is with regard to the teacher contracts. Did we end up at that 3.2 for everyone, or did we somehow get to the 5.5 for everyone?
Once they have to ratify it Friday before we can talk about it. So I can't go into any of the terms and conditions.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Got it.
And I'm assuming that pensions are not included in that budget.
We do, our payroll pays for part of the pensions, teacher pensions and whatnot, so part of all the payroll taxes and everything else. What are the percentages on, do you know what those are?
I don't know.
So there's some, we're responsible for some as a district, then the employee pays some of it too, but those are all, that all comes out of our payroll and benefits packages.
Thanks so much for just all the transparency around the district data. I was curious, you were talking about families leaving the district. I was wondering what sort of data you have on teachers leaving and what information you might be gathering from their choices and movements and what that's doing to inform your own planning.
Great. You want to take that away?
Yeah, so we do request information from all teachers when they leave, and that's also with any staff member, so it'd be a paraeducator or a teacher, to try to figure out the why behind it. And often, as you would see in many fields, it's personal choice or personal life circumstances. We did see an increased rate of retirement during COVID and post-COVID, where people just retired and exited the profession altogether. We also saw heightened mobility in staff because they were able to, their spouses were able to move or their partners were able to move and work remotely, and so they weren't able to go back to their home area. The challenge from our perspective too is that if you went back to that slide regarding pay, we have to remain competitive because most of our teachers and educators and classified staff don't live here. So they have to commute through other districts. So other districts who may have other sources of funding that we don't have access to, they're increasing their rates, and in order, we have to stay competitive or we will not get high quality teachers and educators for our kids. So that's another thing that we have to be sensitive to, but we just don't quite have the funding to match that. So it's a challenge, but we do see recently, most of our exits have been because there's been life circumstances that have taken them elsewhere, or because they're frankly just leaving the profession altogether due to retirement or making other choices.
I think, the last few years in particular, it's just been a really tough time to be an educator. It's been a tough time to be a healthcare worker. It's been a tough time to be a person. Just going through, and so I know we have some who have kind of put it on hold and said, I'm going to take a break right now, and I'm going to take a leave and see where life takes me, and then I might come back into the profession, or I might not. And others, I'd be remiss, I have to be honest too, that say that some people, the demands of our community, they eventually, the pressure or the negative interactions with a parent, they choose to go somewhere else. It's not a lot, but it does happen. And so that's where we're trying to continue to have conversations with our community to make sure we're a partner and not an adversary. So that's a piece too.
When you said that there are things that bigger school districts can do more easily than we can you give some examples of
Sure.
such things?
We cut our 2 assistant principal positions at our elementary this past school year. We cut a assistant director of special education. I didn't backfill my assistant superintendent role, so we're going without that right now. When you're in a bigger district and that $10,000 per kid, those dollars can go a lot further. So other districts have retained some of those things, but then there are also other things in terms of programming. How many AP classes can I offer? Or if I'm in a big district, I might have an IB high school, plus an AP high school, plus a different, innovation learning high school. In a one high school town, you try to be everything, but you can't be everything too. And so there are some choices you have to make. And then when you can't fill up a class, so if we have a Calc BC class, that's been the one that's talked about a lot. We have a Calc AB class, and that usually fills up 1 or 2 sections. But if we don't have 24 kids to make that Calc BC, then we have to look at online learning for those students or Bellevue College. Whereas a bigger district, you can sometimes run some smaller classes here and there that you just can't in a small district.
And then do you lose them? Then do you lose their funding?
If they stay with us for ALE, online learning, we retain that, but we do have to pay a fee for the online learning. So, but it's not as much. If they go to Bellevue College, yes,
you lose that.
then we start to lose that for that one section of the. Yeah. Corinne, did you have one question? Okay, just scratching. Yeah, Michelle.
How big of an impact do you think Privet is on the funding? I mean, there's like busloads of kids that go there
It's
every
big.
period.
There are probably 70 plus kids right now taking a math class down there. We probably have another 25 to 30 taking an English class, and then another 10 to 15 probably taking a language class right now. I haven't looked at numbers right now, but I think that's
loss on that then?
It'd be 10.2 of 10,000. So just $2,000 all the way up. Yeah.
How are the staff and teachers doing as far as them themselves taking leaves of absences or taking a lot of sick days or taking huge chunks of time off and leaving children in classes as substitutes?
Yeah. So Aaron, you can speak to this more. Because during COVID, people weren't using a lot of sick leave. If we were at home and it was online learning and different things, it was more flexible. So people banked a lot more of their sick time than before. And I would say last year we did see an uptick in the number of days that were being taken by our staff. And I'm not saying that it was abused or whatnot. There was a lot of exhaustion. There was a lot of illness just because of that. I think it's going to turn around this year to get a lot more normal. We're already seeing, we're not seeing the major days. I think we've had one Friday. Well, we haven't had that many Fridays, but we've had one Friday where it was challenging to fill all of the positions. But I think it's going to be a lot better this year, just walking around the schools, people feeling like, okay, this is school again. And so I think some of those variables have been taken. But we'll be watching that. Fridays and Mondays are tough, as it seems like out on the road when I'm commuting in. Doesn't seem like many people work on Fridays and Mondays anymore. Those are pretty light days on my commute in. So, it's really trying to think about, again, how do we make sure everyone belongs and they feel connected to their schools.
And you've got enough substitutes? I know there's a
That's
nationwide
ongoing.
substitute shortage.
And that continues to be a struggle. So we're always looking for substitutes, both certificate and classified. And if you have a degree, you can become emergency certificate. And we do provide training for parents, so that's my plug to get more substitutes here. Your question with regard to leaves of absence, we have more people who are on like long-term leaves of absence, in part because of our enrollment decline. We need fewer staff, so we've had to make reduction in force 2 years in a row, and so we therefore will grant leaves of absence to people. So if the position's backfilled, and often we don't backfill the position, that person who comes in is on a full year, so you'll get someone for a year. So I assume you're talking about a different leave, but you're talking about disrupting the year is what you're referencing, is that right? So we do have more people, so yeah, it was harder because people had more time. And I do think that the adjustment coming back to in person was challenging and put a certain amount of strain on the staff. And so we did see more absences than we have historically. But as Fred pointed out, Dr. Rondo pointed out, Fred pointed out, so far that seems to be less. But it is about trying to make teachers want to be here, make our parents want to be here, and feel as if drawn to be here even on the hard days. Right? So that's all about community and culture. So that's part of my task.
Yeah, so one thing I'm a little concerned about, both like personally and just about its impact possibly on enrollment, is like the high cap program and the future of that, and some of the other, like you mentioned, BC calculus and some of these advanced instruction. Like from speaking to other parents, especially with like the demographic changes on the island, like a lot of people they're concerned about that. Like, will that be around? Will that be something that my kids can benefit from if they, if that's how it works out? And if not, then we're going to look at other options. And
sure.
I just wanted to hear, like, what are your thoughts about that? What is the future of those programs?
Yeah, so highly capable education, or high cap, gifted and talented, it's referred in a lot of different ways. There are state statutes around it in terms of school districts providing those opportunities and those options. So two things on that. One is, if we go back to those barriers, they're about right when I was leaving Lake Ridge, so 11 years ago or so, we were qualifying boys to girls 2.5 to 1, almost 3 to 1, and so we really had to look at. Did I say girls to boys?
Yes.
Boys to girls. I hope I said that right. So we were looking at inequities then. So we changed our assessments to try to figure out what were we doing in terms of our qualifications that seemed to be creating this gender gap. We rolled with those qualifications for a number of years. And then we did another review to say, where are we now and what's happening? And through that, we learned quite a bit from our community and from others around our highly capable services, and whether or not students were really getting the full experience. Were we identifying the students who were truly highly capable, or were we over-identifying students at that point? Were we creating inequities in a different way? So we changed the metrics again in the way that we're assessing, still using COGAT, still using the ITBS, but then adding in some elements from the ITBS, adding in a creativity score to try to figure out how do we identify students in a different way. I think what we've learned from that is that we will probably always have some self-contained classrooms in elementary all the way through, just because of the qualification. We weren't sure that was going to happen, but I think what the data has clearly showed us is, right now we have one full third grade at Lake Ridge. We have 3, 4, 5 splits, and then we have a 5th grade section at West Mercer. And based on the data, probably going to continue with some form of option all the way through within our self-contained model. Our middle school model, then, once students are there, we have science, we have social studies, language arts, math, and I think that those will continue. And then we're actually going to be expanding AP offerings at the high school. Hopefully starting next year, we're going to add 1 or 2 more social studies AP classes, hopefully 1 in the freshman year or certainly in the sophomore year, and then another advanced class. So it's going to be here and it's going to stay. The other thing, though, that we did is actually students used to have to qualify. Either you were all in or you were not in at all. So I had to qualify in literacy and math, and then I'd get services. And now we're trying to say, if you've qualified in math, we can still serve you. You don't need to go to Lake Ridge or West Mercer for those services. You can stay at Island Park or Northwood or in a different class, and we can still serve you and give you advanced opportunities in those areas. So we've actually expanded services. Now, going back 2 years ago, back to my whole communication plan, it was completely blown in terms of how we communicated it, in terms of how that all rolled out. I think when we rolled it out in the middle of the pandemic and other things, and it was a complete catastrophe. And we have to rectify that, we have to change that, and we have to continue to tell a different story so that it is about kids actually having layers of services and not an either or at elementary, the same services at middle school, and then high school continuing to expand. Now, the middle school route, we're actually going to be adding a course next year, which is going to be a 7-8 compacted math class. The other concern we used to have is if you didn't kind of get on that advanced math track by 5th grade, then it was really hard to get onto that unless you doubled up somewhere. What we're going to start next year is, yes, kids can still advance and move ahead a grade in 5th grade or 6th grade, but we're going to add a 7-8 compacted math class starting next year, so that if I, as a student, math's really not my thing, but all of a sudden I start to really get into it in middle school, after 6th grade, I can take a 7-8 class in 1 year. Then I can take algebra as an 8th grader, and I can get onto that accelerated path without ever testing, without ever skipping. And so then, now what's that going to do? That Calc BC class in another 4 or 5 years is going to be well enough. We'll have enough to start funding that because we'll have more students.
Yeah, that's very encouraging. Thanks.
So,
yeah, the communication was, I just think it freaked people out, but I'm glad to hear that things are back on track.
Yep. Thanks for asking the question. Yeah.
I'm curious about how the funding was impact for the technology. I know my kid personally, she got a new iPad. I was wondering how does this work on the district?
Great.
Yeah.
Take it away, Andrew.
So we're fortunate in this district to have very supportive families that have supported our capital and projects levies. That technology levy is really what is helping to provide all of the equipment for your students and our staff, along with a lot of the enterprise systems that we have throughout the district. So some of the challenges that Fred was referring to when he was looking at overall funding across the district aren't impacted as much because we haven't had the same restrictions across some of our other funding sources like our levies. Not all levies.
So the cap
tech, clarify
so
that.
The cap tech levy, the capital and technology levy, that we still get to set based on property values, and that goes through a whole different set of approval versus the EP&O. So fortunately, our technology has been in a good position because of that.
And I should just make another plug. Our community supported our last capital projects levy at, I think, it's 70% approval rate.
73%.
So that was just really awesome of our community to really come out and not just pass, but pass with an overwhelming level of support.
What other areas are funded by property values? Like, that's great.
Yep.
I didn't know that.
So transportation, but it has to be a different metric. What's the how do the transportation, does that?
It's funded via the state, and it's funded by number of routes you have, passengers, students, if you will, and buses, length of routes, and so there's convoluted formula that the state provides. compensation for.
And then when we go to run a transportation levy, we set that on our own based on the dollar value we
Correct.
want and then base it off of the property value. So we figure out what do we think is the appetite for our community. The challenge with the transportation levy is you only collect it once and it's all at once. And then you can't collect it again for 6 years or 4?
It's 4.
4 years, and then you collect it again. So some levies, you collect a little bit each year along the way. Transportation, you get it all at once, so it's a big hit on your tax bills that 1 year, and then you don't see it for a while. So that's another reason not to run it when we did. We already had 2 other levies, so we have to be, we don't want to bounce your tax bills.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
All good?
Thank you for coming. A lot of information.
Great.
Let us know if you have any questions along the way, and have a wonderful school year.
Okay, thank you.